Seattle was hit by a tsunami of shit on Saturday. I know I'm exaggerating a little, but that's exactly how I felt when my life started to fall apart. It all started shortly after I decided to use AI to add some fire to my sex life. Don't get too excited, I wasn't planning on having sex with a robot. I just joined the long list of people who used the technology of their time for sex. Ancient erotic cave art, the Venus of Willendorf, the Venus de Milo, and countless adult websites are just a few examples of this. Sex with my wife was always great, and I never wanted to be with anyone else. So I had no problems with the quality of sex. I wanted to improve its quantity. After 5 years of marriage, my wife and I's passion subsided, and we only had sex once a week. One obvious way to increase the amount of sex you have is to simply ask your wife, "Honey, would you like to get a little naughty today?" She often agreed. However, she often said no, and usually for very good reasons. How can I improve the ratio of sex achieved to sex requested? I decided to approach this logically. If I ask for sex every night, it will probably make her angry and there will be less sex. On the other hand, if I don't ask her often enough, I'll miss moments when she would be ready, and there will be less sex too. Trouble. Of course, between these extremes, there is a middle ground that optimizes the amount of sex, but how to find it? Being a geek, I decided to find a technological solution to this problem. But first, a few words about my wife. Sally is a charming and curvy woman with sparkling green eyes. We met while waiting in a long line at Starbucks, where a rookie barista moved us through the line at a snail's pace. Sally noticed my impatience and said, "Well, better late than never." Raised by a pair of pun-loving parents, I responded out of habit. "So you're saying don't worry, be a frap. Is this your best shot?" Sip, it happens. New, latte, yes. Lots of bad coffee puns were thrown at each other before our orders were finally ready. She raised the cup to me and said, "Well, that was great. Have a great day, Java." Turning around, I said, "Wait, Affogato, take your number." She actually laughed and said, "Okay, well played. Unblock the text application." She typed a few keys on my phone, and then her phone rang. "Don't make me wait too long before you call." This really cheered me up. I called her that evening, and our dates began. After several encounters with her mind, I was captivated. One conquest led to another, and we soon became an exclusive couple. She had recently graduated from medical school and was currently completing her residency in internal medicine. I was pursuing a master's degree in electrical engineering and computer science. Soon we moved in together. We got married after graduation, and she joined a multidisciplinary clinic here in Seattle. I worked for a large technology company for several years, and then left to pursue personal AI projects. My main project involved the development of new sensors for fast and accurate real-time analysis of volatile airborne compounds. If this sounds a little abstract, let's just say I was creating an electronic nose. You may ask why we need an electronic nose. After all, humans have been training dogs and other mammals for years to detect illegal substances, track fugitives, and track hidden mines. However, training these animals requires a lot of time and money, and their service life is relatively short. The development of a reliable and inexpensive electronic nose could change this. My plan was to perfect my electronic nose, patent its innards, and then license it to other companies for a lot of money. I've already thought of several commercial applications for a high-tech electronic nose. A grocery store could quickly scan the entire fruit and vegetable section and remove spoiled produce. ISA and customs officers could quickly scan luggage and passengers for controlled substances, explosives, and other prohibited substances. My device is not the first electronic nose in the world. However, mine is unique in several ways. It is portable and uses an array of solid-state sensors that can simultaneously analyze the air for hundreds of thousands of compounds. But the secret sauce that makes my electronic nose so effective is his Roman 2 rear end. It's based on a convolutional neural network model that I trained for several days on a large multiprocessor desktop in my lab. I then deployed this trained model on a retrofitted Raspberry Pi connected to my sensor array. The entire system can analyze a huge number of different odor combinations and recognize specific odor profiles, that is, the unique odor that certain things have. The score is a clever metaphor for smell. If you don't have a musical background, all you see on the page is a bunch of black dots and lines. If you take a couple of lessons in reading music, you can play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" on the piano. An experienced studio musician can read the score and play it to its full potential without rehearsal. An orchestra conductor can look at a musical score and mentally hear each instrument of the orchestra simultaneously playing its part from Beethoven's Third Symphony. It's all about learning. My electronic nose is trained to recognize chords, scales, arpeggios, and scent symphonies. I'm most interested in using my electronic nose to analyze some of the many odors that constantly emanate from people and other animals. Our puny human noses can tell us when it's time to shower, or which pair of underwear is clean and which isn't. We can tell when milk has gone sour or when one of the science experiments on the back shelf of our refrigerator needs to be destroyed forever. In contrast, my electronic nose can correctly identify individuals based on their scent alone. He can distinguish the smell of a sheep from the smell of a wolf. He can tell the difference between a sleepy sheep, a scared sheep, and an excited sheep. Over the past year, I have been working with colleagues at our state's veterinary school to track the estrus mating period of various domestic animals. Dogs, cats, sheep, goats, cattle, and horses mate only a few times a year. If you breed and raise these animals for a living, it is very useful to know when they are in heat. Then you can arrange a date with your partner and produce even more animals. By training my electronic nose to smell different mammal scents, my electronic nose was able to accurately detect which phase of estrus the animals were in. To isolate odors associated with estrus, I had to train my AI to recognize and ignore other smells such as burps, farts, urine, or animal poop. I also had to train it to recognize compounds released by animals in states of anxiety or fear. You've probably heard that animals can feel fear. Now this can be my electronic nose. Once the system worked in animals, I wondered how well it would work in humans, who are a little different from many other mammals. Female primates, including humans, have a cycle rather than an estrus cycle. This means that their mating season lasts almost all year round. Yay, primates. Can my electronic nose tell me when my wife is most receptive to sexual innuendo? It was an intriguing thought. To test this idea, I installed an electronic nose in my home with sensor arrays in several rooms, including our bedroom. Then it never occurred to me to tell my wife about this experiment. My wife, on the other hand, would never make this mistake. If she were giving one of her patients an experimental drug, she would first obtain informed consent from that patient. When it finally occurred to me, I cowardly decided to put off talking to her until I had gathered a little more data. As it turned out, this was a good decision. After installing the electronic nose, I began collecting data on the smells in our home and correlating it with a diary of our lives, especially our sex lives. It took some time to select and classify most of the pleasant and unpleasant smells of our daily life. My electronic nose slowly learned to recognize most of what we cooked and ate. I kept a diary of our general moods: happy, angry, calm, etc. You're probably wondering if I also kept a diary of each of our various secretions and emissions, such as hiccups, farts, belching, sneezing, urination, and defecation. I did, but every other day it drove me crazy. Instead, I installed several hidden sensors in our toilets to automatically record waste without human intervention. Finally, I found a way to quietly remove my wife's secretions without alerting her to what I was doing. I kept a rag by the bed to wipe my face after my sex session with Sally. After Sally fell asleep, I quietly ran the sensor over this rag. I also trained my system to recognize the smell of my own secretions. After a few months of collecting data, I used it to train my AI model based on Sally and I's personal sexual sense. I then loaded this new learning into my electronic nose and tried to predict the optimal times to propose to my lover. The results exceeded my expectations. Advertisers use the term to refer to the percentage of times that viewing an online ad results in a mouse click. They are happy with a conversion rate of 2 to 3%. Using this definition, my sex conversion rate increased from 20% to 50%. I was delighted. Increased sex conversion rates weren't the only benefit of my new and improved electronic nose. Our bedroom scent log reflected many aspects of our sexual encounters, including our individual levels of desire. I used this data to understand what really turned Sally on so I could improve my carnal skills. After 5 happy years, our marriage hit a major setback a month ago. Sally just returned from a week-long trip to an internal medicine convention in Chicago. She usually returned from these trips tired but happy and greeted me with a warm hug and a big kiss. On the way home from the Seattle-Tacoma airport, she told me about her adventures at the meeting and shared some of the wild stories of her fellow doctors. I told her about the events at home, and we laughed and talked until we got home. Despite the tiring trips, she usually had enough energy left for some nice, I'm glad to be home sex before we fell asleep. This time it was different. When I met her at baggage claim, Sally looked a little depressed. Instead of our usual hug, I only received a brief one-armed hug before she rushed off to find her bag. As soon as she saw her, we went to the car and headed home. "Honey, what happened?" I asked. "What do you mean? You look a little depressed and upset." She sighed and replied, "I guess I'm just tired. The meeting was long and the flight home was bumpy. A good night's sleep should fix this. I know something that will make you feel a lot better once we get home." "Darling, I'm too tired for what's on your mind." I swallowed my slight disappointment and did everything possible to support my wife. After we got home, I offered to massage her feet. However, she pushed my hands away and said that she was too tired even for that. She went up to the bedroom alone without even our usual goodnight hugs and kisses. I heard the shower start, and then everything went quiet upstairs. I was too excited to sleep, so I went to my office on the first floor. To calm my mind, I began my usual pre-bed rituals, paying bills, checking email, and correlating the day's activities with my electronic nose log. When the system started plotting smells for the day, I thought, there won't be anything interesting here. Much to my surprise, the electronic nose began picking up signs of recent sexual activity as soon as my wife entered the bedroom. What the hell? It took a few minutes before my heart rate dropped to normal levels, and I was able to calm down enough to think straight. I tried my best and couldn't think of ways to explain the false positive result of the electronic nose. However, the nose itself was not ambiguous. He estimated the probability of my wife having recently had sex at 95% with a fairly narrow confidence interval. Damn it, the thought of Sally cheating on me was unbearable. When we started dating, it became clear that we had similar views on cheating and fidelity. We despised the first and admired the second. I would bet all my assets on Sally keeping her vows to me. I needed more confirmation before I could believe her possible wrongdoing. When I finally went up to the bedroom, Sally was fast asleep. While brushing my teeth, it occurred to me to check her clothes in the dirty laundry basket. Her travel clothes were on top, but not her panties. I rummaged through the basket and found them at the very bottom, under my clothes. Why are they here? In order not to contaminate her panties with my smell, I picked them up with tweezers and quickly examined them. I couldn't be completely sure. Damn. I hope this isn't what I thought. I placed the panties in a clean plastic sample bag. I looked into the bedroom and saw that Sally was still sleeping. I went downstairs with her panties. I ran the electronic nose sensor over the opening of the bag and immediately received a signal spike indicating the presence of male discharge. Crap. Then I thought, wait, these panties could be weeks old and still capture my discharge from the previous lovemaking we had right before her trip. To test this, I called up the odor profile of my own secretions and compared it to what was on her panties. The curves were somewhat similar, but different enough to remove any doubt. This is not my discharge. Damn and damn again. Note to self. In hindsight, reading stories on Literotica that night for marriage advice was probably a bad idea. I wandered through the section like a drunken sailor, dangling between stories of betrayal and tales of reconciliation like a drunken sailor. With swords were burning, and the bastards were beaten. There were unrighteous reconciled, and betrayal is forgiven in incredible scenarios that would make even Gandhi roll his eyes. Scattered amidst explosive tales of rage and revenge for several hours, I gave in. I didn't find any solutions to my problem and didn't feel any better. But one thing I realized is that much of the anguish in these stories was caused by angry spouses shooting first and asking questions later. I decided that if I had to explode at Sally, I wanted to make sure that she really deserved it. I didn't find a quick way to sleep that night. I left the internet and went to our bar. After several glasses of Tears of a Writer, I was finally able to fall into a restless sleep. Sunday morning, I woke up feeling like I had been run over with cold shit on spilled baby shit. W.S. Fields once described his hangover as, "I feel like the Russian army was marching across my mouth in wool socks." It is obvious that some hostile forces were performing maneuvers in my mouth while I was sleeping. I deliberately tried not to breathe near the sensor array of the electronic nose. There is no point in overloading it at such a moment. My online research last night turned up nothing, so I pretended everything was fine. My wife seemed to take the same approach. We had a silent breakfast and didn't talk much throughout the weekend. I'm a problem solver by nature, so I dove straight into my first big question. Is Sally cheating on me? I called several private detectives, but their prices shocked me. Instead, I went to Amazon and ordered a GPS tracker for next-day delivery. Installing it on Sally's car was easy, and I followed her movements over the next week using the app on my phone. I had a preliminary meeting with an attorney who gave me a pretty depressing preview of what the divorce would be like. He also gave me a list of steps I could take to separate our finances if it became necessary. It's been a long week. Sally and I both went to work during the day and didn't talk much when we got home in the evening. Of course, we didn't have sex. At breakfast on Friday, Sally announced that she had an evening shift. I frowned at this news. "Why are you working late today? I thought you weren't on duty until next week." She didn't look me in the eye. "I swapped shifts with Bill Stevens so he could go to his son's football game." "Okay, I'll see you when I see you. I might also be a little late. I have a project in my lab that I'm trying to debug." Sally left for work, and I stayed to check the odor logs from our dining room. Besides the big bacon spike, there were clearly volatile catecholamines in the air. Sally was upset about something and maybe even a little scared. I worked at home all day, periodically checking the tracker on my phone. Everything was okay. Around 5 p.m., I packed up my sandwiches and drinks and drove to Sally's clinic building, parking on the street. Around 6 p.m. my app rang, and she was on the move. I watched as her car left the clinic parking lot and headed in the opposite direction from the hospital. I followed her for several miles to North Aurora Avenue. She turned into the parking lot of the Shady Nell Motel and drove behind the building. I quickly parked and walked up to the building, just in time to see her approach room 127 and knock on the door. I returned to the car and found a parking space behind the motel, a few rows behind Sally's car, where I could see number 127. A minute later, I got out of the car and walked up to the room. The lights in the room were on, but the curtains were drawn tightly. You won't see anything. I leaned against the door for a few seconds, but couldn't hear anything over the noise of the ice maker next to the door. I walked around the parking lot and took photos of the license plates of all the cars in the parking lot. Back in the car, I began to wait with my camera at the ready. About 30 minutes later, the door to room 127 opened and Sally came out. I took it on video. A weak male voice could be heard from the room for a few seconds before she slammed the door and headed towards the car. She got into the car and drove away. I decided to stay and see who would leave the room. After another 30 minutes, a vaguely familiar man came out. I took a few pictures of him leaving the room and getting into the Honda parked nearby. I didn't know his name, but now I had his license plate number. I checked the GPS app and saw that Sally's car had stopped again. I zoomed in on the map and saw an icon that said Streamliner Diner. Sally and I have eaten there several times. Good, unpretentious food at reasonable prices. I parked in the diner's parking lot and looked out the window. I saw Sally sitting alone at a table drinking coffee. I found a convenient spot where I could see her table, but she was only talking to the waitress. At about 10:45 p.m., she got up and went to pay the bill. I quickly returned to the car and drove home. I beat Sally by 5 minutes. Sally returned home around 11:15 p.m. when she entered the house. It was almost a repeat of her return from the convention. No hugs, no kisses, she immediately went to the shower and went to bed, barely exchanging a few words with me. After she left, I sneaked into the laundry room and ran my electronic nose over her clothes. There was certainly a strong peak, with a profile matching what I got from her clothes last week. I was extremely unhappy. I poured myself a generous helping of Tears of a Writer and sat down to ponder my dark thoughts. As I sipped my whiskey, I tried to remember where I had seen the guy from room 127. Occam's razor suggested that I consider the simplest explanation that Mr. Shady Nell was also Mr. Chicago. If he was in Chicago during the Internal Medicine Congress, he might have been an internist. I pulled out my iPad and found the King County Medical Society website. I scrolled down the menu and selected internal medicine. A few seconds later, I had a list of 174 internists in our city. I started going through the names one by one, looking at the photographs. And luckily, I saw his photo near the end of the list, Tom Wilson. From the address of his practice, I realized that he works on the other side of town from Sally's clinic. Okay, that explains why he looked familiar to me. I probably saw him at one of the many medical events. It now seems likely that he was actually in Chicago last week with Sally. Yesterday was probably the second part of what started there. Crap. I decided to put the drink aside. I'll need a clear head for tomorrow. My mind was in turmoil after all this scheming, so I took a sleeping pill and climbed into bed with Sally. In the end, I was plunged into 6 hours of nightmares in which I failed again and again at a variety of unclear and impossible tasks. It was a huge relief to wake up from the nightmare. The relief quickly faded as I remembered the veritable nightmare I was now living through. Sally was already on her feet. I got up, peed, and showered. The hot water was great, but I couldn't put off talking to Sally any longer. She was sitting at our kitchen table, drank coffee, and ate toast. I took a mug of coffee and sat down opposite. Okay, let's begin. I took a deep breath and said, Sally, we need to talk. About what? You've been acting like a zombie since you got back from Chicago. Is there something you want to tell me? Her face wrinkled and she began to cry. I am so sorry. Something terrible happened in Chicago, and it's tearing me apart inside. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid that you would hate me. She was sobbing bitterly. My instinctive reaction was to hug her and comfort her. I suppressed this desire with difficulty and handed her a box of tissues. Take your time, we have the whole day ahead of us. She slowly calmed down, took a deep breath, and let it out. Everything was fine until Friday. After the afternoon sessions, I had dinner with my colleagues at the hotel. Then we had a few cocktails in the hotel bar. The next thing I remember was I was naked in bed. I was very confused and didn't understand what was happening. The only explanation that came to mind was that it was you who came to Chicago and somehow ended up in my room. I said, John, what are you doing here? The voice I wasn't expecting answered, I had sex with you again. Who the hell are you, Tom? What are you doing in my room? It was Tom Wilson, another intern from Seattle. He said, don't you remember? We were drinking last night and you invited me to your room. We had sex all night. You were so hot yesterday, I couldn't resist doing it again before your flight home. I screamed at him to get out of my room. He said, sure, no problem, but we'll do it again when we get back to Seattle. I screamed, no way, get out, get out, get out. Sally began to sob again. She looked so miserable that I couldn't stand it anymore. I walked up to her and hugged her. We cried together for several minutes. I stroked her hair and tried to console her. When her sobs subsided, she looked at me. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I would never do something like that with another man. Please believe me." I nodded. "Yeah, that's really not like you. What else happened?" After he left, I was shocked, but I realized that I needed to go to the airport. I just threw all my stuff in my bag and called a taxi to O'Hare. The flight home was unbearable. I wavered between horror at what I had done and fear about how to tell you. It was disgusting. That's why I was so harsh. When I got home, all I could think about was taking a long, hot shower and trying to wash all traces of this bastard out of my body and soul. But it did not help. I've barely slept all week. I was just thinking of what to tell you when Tom called me on Wednesday. He said he wanted to meet for another round of sex. I raised my eyebrows at this. Before I could say anything, Sally added, "Don't worry, I told him to go to hell." But then he said that he had videos of us together in Chicago and that he would send them to you. I tried to buy time, but he insisted on meeting at this shabby hotel in northern Aurora. That's why I went there last night. My heart sank. So trading shifts with Bill is a lie. His face wrinkled. "Yes, and I'm so sorry. I desperately tried to find a way out of this situation. I was nervous and sleep-deprived and made a bad decision." I sighed and shook my head. "So what happened in your sex marathon last night?" "No, that's not what happened. I went to the motel because I wanted to buy time and come up with a better plan. I did not have sex with Tom last night." "And why should I believe you?" "It sounds bad, but please let me explain." I shrugged and motioned for her to continue. When I arrived, he began to undress and told me to take off my clothes. I refused, so he took out his iPad and showed me a short video of him having sex with me. I started crying, but he just laughed at me and pulled down his pants. Sally was sobbing. It was terrible. Sally made a face. That was the last straw. I screamed back, "No, I don't want to, bastard." I was sick of what he did. And then an idea came to me, and I stuck my finger down my throat. It was enough to make me vomit, and I vomited my dinner right into his lap. I was amazed. "Did you throw up on his lap?" "Yes." I sprayed his groin with a partially overcooked spicy burrito. Within seconds, he ran into the bathroom and started jumping up and down, desperately trying to wash the spicy food off his body. I think my burrito explosion, mixed with stomach acid and a few extra doses of El Muerto hot sauce, gave his genitals a real torture. I looked at Sally with bulging eyes, and then a wave of absurdity hit me and I started laughing. This shocked Sally at first, but then she started laughing too. This caused a feedback effect, and we both started laughing louder and louder. I couldn't take it anymore. "I give up. I give up." I should have known that trading anatomy puns with a doctor is like fighting tactics against a machete. We laughed until we almost suffocated. We found ourselves in each other's arms, choking in fits of laughter. When we finally calmed down, I took a deep breath and said, "Wow, I really didn't expect our conversation to end like this." "Me too. I was afraid of this conversation all this time. I was afraid that you would kick me out of the house." "I did have dark thoughts, but I wanted to hear your side first. You know, this is the first time I've seen the sparkle in your eyes since you left for that damn meeting in Chicago. Welcome back from the world of the dead." "Thank you, darling. This is the first time in a long time that I felt like I could laugh. However, we need to resolve one important issue: my sex with Tom in Chicago. I told you what I remember. Now let me tell you what I think actually happened." "Fine," I replied. "What do you know about illegal substances that are used to force a person to have sex?" I thought for a moment, and then my eyes widened. "Oh shit, I should have thought about it." "And me too. I would immediately think about this if one of my patients told me such a story. However, a combination of sleep deprivation, guilt, anxiety, and possibly residual illicit substances left me working all week with only half a brain. She fell silent for a few seconds. And let's add denial to this list. Here I am, a smart, educated woman, damn it, a doctor. It's hard to admit that I was so stupid that I let some bastard put something in my drink. She started crying again in my arms. Don't hit yourself so hard, honey. You trusted your colleague, a person you had known for many years. This could happen to anyone. I held her for a while until she stopped crying. Then I said, "Is it too late for you to get tested for controlled substances?" It really depends on the specific drug. Some come out quickly. Others are slow. It took too long for them to show up in blood or urine. However, some of the long-acting ones may still be present. The good news is that several drugs can still be detected in hair samples within a few weeks. I said, "Honey, if Tom slipped you something, then you didn't cheat on me, you were forced to. And what happened last night was another sexual assault. What would you do for one of your patients if this happened to them?" You're right, I would send them to the emergency room and collect evidence of sexual assault. Let's go right now. Even if my blood or urine tests come back negative, the drugs could still be found in my hair. One more question, Sally. Is there a chance that Tom could have impregnated or infected you? She shook her head. I did at least one smart thing in Chicago. I stopped a taxi at the pharmacy on the way to O'Hare. I bought Plan B emergency protection and started taking the medications immediately. To make pregnancy even less likely, I will ask for the copper piece to be inserted after all the samples for evidence of abuse have been collected. I will be tested for diseases after the evidence is collected. Sally and I each made one call. Sally called Wilma Barrett, a gynecologist from his clinic. In addition to general gynecology, Wilma is also a forensic expert in sexual crimes. I called Mark Johnson, one of my best friends. We met many years ago while playing music together at a local fiddle festival. In addition to being an excellent guitarist, Mark is also a detective in the Seattle Police Department. We drove to the hospital emergency room and met Mark in the parking lot. Sally was about to hug him, but Mark asked to wait until the forensic examination was completed. We all went inside where Wilma met us. I told Mark what happened to Sally. About 4 hours passed before Sally completed her examination. Wilma came out a few minutes later and sat down next to us. Sally is taking a shower now and will join us in a few minutes. John, she gave me permission to tell you both what I found. However, some parts may be quite difficult for you. Do you really want to hear everything I'm going to tell Mark? I nodded. Okay, I just did a pretty invasive physical exam on Sally. I started by taking hair samples. We took blood and urine samples, as well as fingernail scrapings. She turned to Mark. We will send all our samples for DNA testing, but it could take a week or two, even if we rush. However, we will get some results from the blood and urine tests within a few hours, especially if I make a few connections in our laboratory. Disease test results will be available in a day or two. We send hair samples for a 17-panel test, which will take at least a few days. I'll call you as soon as we get all the drug test results. I took out my plastic sample bag and handed it to Wilma. Here's a pair of panties Sally wore on the flight home. Is it possible to check them too? Wilma raised her eyebrows. Where did you get them from? Sally seemed a little out of sorts after returning home from the airport. She didn't say much on the way home and went straight to the shower. While she was there, I looked at her clothes. I didn't touch them. Wilma looked at me intently. You are hiding something from us. Most husbands don't turn their women's things into a crime scene when they return from a trip. Why did you pack those panties, John? I sighed. I had good reason to worry about Sally. I'll tell you everything. I paused, and I'll tell Sally too. While we were waiting for Sally, I briefly spoke to Mark and Wilma about his work with an electronic nose. He told me how this led me to become suspicious and why I collected her panties for evidence. Mark shook his head. Wow, that electronic nose sounds crazy. As a polygraph, we can't use his testimony in court, but we can use any other evidence he finds. I was glad to hear this. A few minutes later, Sally came out. We said goodbye to Mark and Wilma and went home. We had a quiet dinner and went to bed early. We hugged each other and eventually fell asleep. Our 2 terrible days left us both mentally and physically exhausted, so the next morning Sally called work and said she was sick. After dinner on Monday night, I gathered my courage and told Sally all about the electronic nose and how I was using it to assess her general condition. I mentioned how this led to the collection of her panties. She thought about it for a while and finally said, "I'm ambivalent about this, John. Honestly, I'm angry that you watched me like a lab rat. It was a damn smart move. You should have told me what you were doing." I lowered my head. "Yes, I should have. I'm sorry." "Well, I was hiding some pretty serious things from you too. Looks like we both have some work to do on rebuilding trust in each other." She sighed. "Overall, though, I'm glad you were pursuing your secret electronic nose experiment. This helped us start to get to the bottom of this and led to my panties being kept as evidence." The next 2 days gave me a lot of time to think about the wildness of the emotional roller coaster we found ourselves on. The absolute trust I had in my wife was seriously damaged when my electronic nose told me she was cheating on me. I found myself in an unpleasant dilemma. I hated the thought of being taken advantage of, but I hated it less than the thought of her cheating. I desperately wanted to believe her story about Tom. I'm not a religious person, but I still prayed to the universe that the results of the evidence set would confirm her story. And how will I feel if the results of the evidence set are positive? Will this remove any remaining doubts about Sally? Will I be able to trust her again? Sally's candid answers to my questions about Wilson rang true, especially her honest answers to my questions. My gut feeling was to believe that she was an innocent victim. Her description of how she turned his crotch into a disaster zone was absurdly unexpected, but completely believable. I hoped that the results of the evidence set would clear up any remaining doubts I had. The wait for test results was excruciating. Sally kept herself busy by spending hours at the gym or working in our garden. I spent my days pedaling an exercise bike at home or perfecting my electronic nose. These activities exhausted both of us so much that we could fall asleep at night. Wilma called on Wednesday and said she had preliminary results for us. We somehow made it to Wilma's office without getting caught for speeding. "Thank you for coming. I have good and bad news. The swabs we took are all negative so far. However, Sally's panties tested positive for her and another man's discharge. DNA analysis is still not ready. A blood test showed only traces of some substances. The best news is that your hair samples tested positive and clearly showed the presence of several banned substances. Sally, you were mixed up." Sally and I looked at each other and her face scrunched up. I hugged her and we both started crying. I felt a huge sense of relief, followed by a bit of joy and a strong need to comfort my wife. Wilma handed over a box of tissues and gave us time to react to the news. A few minutes later, Sally hugged me one last time and leaned back. She took a deep breath and said, "This worthless bastard, this pathetic pile of crap, this festering boil on the mandrel's ass, this freak." I should mention here that my dear learned puns from her parents, former Marine instructors. They considered creative swearing an art, and Sally was a diligent student. Her years of medical training further enriched her vocabulary of vulgar and offensive language. After a few more obscenities, she calmed down and said in a low, deadly voice, "Carthage must be destroyed." I nodded. "I agree, honey, but remember, 0 and hell punishment cell." Seeing Wilma's puzzled look, I said, "Excuse me, 2 former members of the school's Latin club are talking." She said, "Carthage must be destroyed," referring to the destruction of Carthage by the Romans and the enslavement of its population. Wilma raised her eyebrows. "What did you answer?" I said, "Yes, but don't go to jail. I agree that Dick Snot should be punished, but we must do it without breaking the law." Wilma promised to pass on the lab results to Mark, and we returned home. Mark came to us in the evening to talk about business. He was pleased to hear the preliminary results of the crime kit, but was not optimistic about proving the crime charge against Tom. The problem is that most sex crimes happen in private. In court, it often comes down to a he said, she said issue, and it's hard to predict who the jury will believe more. It would be a lot easier if we could gather more evidence against him. I said, how can we do this? Mark said, catching him in the act with witnesses present would be crucial. But waiting for him to do it again could take months, and we can't keep Sally under police surveillance for that long. Sally said, what if we stage an operation and get him to confess? What if I wear a wire? Mark shook his head. This is too much for you, Sally. It's going to be hard enough dealing with what Wilson already did to you. I can't ask you to go through that again. But what if I want it myself? What if I can prevent this for some other unfortunate woman? Okay, Sally, but all we can do is wait until Tom makes the first move. I can arrange a few things in advance. If Tom tries to meet you again, let me know right away. I can get an emergency warrant, which will allow us to record any interaction with him, and we will have officers waiting nearby. One of Sally's colleagues referred her to a therapist to help her cope with her anger, shame, and depression. I also started seeing a therapist and joined a support group for spouses. The following week, Sally also started working half days. Over the next 2 weeks, life proceeded as usual. Then Sally called me on Wednesday afternoon. John, Tom just called. He wants to meet me at the same motel this Friday at 7 p.m. He threatened me with those videos again. I called Mark immediately, and he applied for a warrant. Mark called me Friday morning to let me know that he had a warrant out for the operation and that he had several officers assigned to assist in the arrest. Sally took the day off and wandered around the house, trying to do routine tasks such as washing, cleaning, and gardening. She also spent several hours on the treadmill and exercise bike in our home gym, burning off nervous energy. At 5 p.m., Mark came to us. Sally, I want to give you one more chance to refuse this operation. Such operations can be quite dangerous, even with a trained officer, and even more so for you. We can find another way to punish this bastard. What do you say? Thanks for the offer, but I'm still in business. I really want to take him down. Mark sighed. Okay, we will do everything we can to ensure your safety. We have no information that Tom has a weapon. However, we must act as if he does have a weapon. We will be monitoring you very closely on video and audio. If you feel you are in danger or want to stop the operation at any time, you will need to say the code word, and we will be in the room in a few seconds. What word do you want to use? I'll say the word disgusting if I'm bothered. Great. We'll put a video and audio recording device in your purse, and we'll also try to install some of them in the motel room. We'll listen to everything you say. Once we have enough information to charge, we'll enter the room unannounced. When this happens, lie down on the floor and stay there until we subdue him. Yes, lie down on the floor and stay there. Okay. Now remember, our goal here is to get him to blame himself. We want you to lead him on for as long as possible, to get him to give as much detail as possible about what he wants you to do and what he will do to you. You, unless you agree. Also, do not eat or drink anything he offers you. I turned to Mark. I want to take part in the operation. Mark shook his head. Sorry, but no way. Operations can be extremely dangerous. It's bad enough that we're putting Sally at risk, but we don't have anyone else we can use as bait. You, on the other hand, are not essential to the operation. Please. Take my word for it, John. Me and a few other officers will be in a surveillance van parked about 20 feet from Wilson's room. I frowned and he said, however, you can come with us in one of our discreet police cars. You will wait about a minute from the scene, and we will bring you to the scene as soon as Wilson is taken into custody. I nodded and turned to Sally. Honey, you're so brave. I'm not strong enough to do what you're about to do. I love you, and I'll be there as soon as Mark lets me. She hugged me tightly. I love you too. Thank you for believing in me, even after I did such a terrible thing. I shook my head. No, the only terrible thing is what Wilson did. You're a wonderful woman, and I love you. I'm proud of what you're doing tonight. Tom introduced me to two detectives who would be waiting with me. We shook hands, and they led me to their car. They took us to a small parking lot a few blocks from the hotel and parked the car. Then we waited. The two officers with me spent time on their phones, quietly reading emails. I tried to do the same, but was too nervous to read more than a few lines of text. I kept checking my watch every few minutes. Finally, 7 p.m. approached, and all three of them put down their phones and sat upright in their seats. The screen on one of the detective's phones flickered. He held it to his ear for a second and said, "Sally just arrived." He fell silent for 30 seconds. She got out of the car and knocked on Wilson's door. More one pause. She's inside. The next 5 minutes felt like 50. They're still just talking. Another 5 minutes passed even more slowly, just talking. Another 5 unbearable minutes passed, and suddenly our driver dropped the phone and started the car. She said the code word, "We're coming." I'm glad I was wearing my seat belt. Police cars have amazing power. We were racing at great speed, with lights flashing. We made it to the motel in seconds and stopped abruptly a few feet from room 127. The two detectives ordered me to stay in the car and ran towards the room. I ignored them and tried to open the car door. It was locked. Crap. All I could see through the open door of the room were several police officers with guns drawn. I was on the verge of panic. However, watching some of them put their weapons in their holsters, I calmed down a little. Finally, I saw Mark walk out the door. He saw me in the back seat of the car, came over and opened my door. I tried to run into the room, but he grabbed me by the shoulders and said, "She's okay, John. She's okay. She'll be out in a minute." He hugged me. Sally was great. She helped us get everything we needed to plant him. "Thanks, Mark." I was so damn scared. Did he hurt her? Not a bit. He laughed. Actually, there was a little pain there, but on the contrary. What do you mean? Right before it all started, Wilson tried to grab her. She punched him. I'll show you the video later. We filmed the whole thing in 4K from multiple angles. We turned towards the room just in time to see Sally exit with her eyes blazing like an angry Valkyrie. When she walked outside, the police applauded. When she saw me, her furious expression softened, and she ran into my arms. "Oh, John, I'm so glad it's over." I held her tightly as she cried and told her how wonderful she was. I'm sure I teared up a little myself. Paramedics rolled the stretcher into the motel room. 10 minutes later, they wheeled them back out with a complaining Wilson strapped to them. Sally tensed, and for a moment I saw the image of Kali, the destroyer, in her eyes. She screamed, "Eat shit and die, you bastard." Then she relaxed and said, "Kicking ass makes you thirsty. You think they allow should we stop for a milkshake on the way to the station?" "I'm sure it can be arranged, sweetheart." There was no objection to us stopping for a milkshake. In fact, Mark joined us at Dick's Drive-In on Lake City Way. It turns out that kicking butts also makes you hungry. After Dick's Deluxe, a side of fries and a milkshake, we were ready for more action. However, just as we were about to head to the police station, Mark received a call. He talked for a few minutes, then hung up and turned to us. "Looks like you don't need to go to the station tonight, Sally. It was one of my people from the medical center Harbor View. Paramedics took him there to check his wounds. It seems like they immediately took him to the operating room to try and save what was left of his manhood." Mark paused for a moment and then nodded at us and said, "Okay, fair enough." Then, with a twinkle in his eye, he said, "You don't need to come to the station tonight. Because of Sally's thrashing of Wilson, he'll be in the hospital for another week. After that, we'll bring him in for questioning and detention. So, have a good night's sleep, and I'll see you tomorrow to complete your application." Sally and I returned home and went to bed, but we were too nervous to sleep. We tried to talk about other things, but we kept coming back to Tom Wilson. Sally said, Mark said Tom will be charged with extortion as well for his attempts to blackmail me. In addition to the jail time, he will lose his medical license and will be placed on the sex offender registry. He will lose his job and will probably never be able to work in medicine again. Sounds like a good start to me, I said. Yes, me too. However, I worry about his partners at the clinic. I know most of them, and they are good people. The stigma could ruin their practice for years. Yes, I remember a case in Sacramento a few years ago where an anesthesiologist sexually assaulted his patients after they passed out. Oh God, yes, it really hit elective surgeries at that hospital for years. At times like these, I'm very glad I'm not in medicine. Tell me, is Tom married? I think so. I met his wife at a local internal medicine society event. I think her name is Nora. They have a son, about 13 years old. Oh God, I'm all for ruining this bastard publicly, but the thought of the side effects on his family is just depressing. Shakes me to the core. Being a teenager is hard enough, and if your father is a criminal, then going to school where everyone knows about it is a special kind of hell. Sally snuggled up to me and sighed. I asked, "What happened?" My therapist is worried that sex with you might trigger memories, but I'm more optimistic. The warm, loving, wonderful sex I've always had with you is completely different from what that bastard did. I'm glad, honey. I had similar concerns. PFFT nonsense. PFFT nonsense? Is that some medical term I don't know? No, moron. Let me translate for your weak male brain. PFFT nonsense is just a more subtle and sophisticated way of saying no way. Let me be clear, honey. If you ever hear me fart during sex, it will be the only time I think about Wilson. But any other sounds I make will only concern you. Your sophistication and grace amaze me. That's why I love your ass so much. I love your ass too, John. She sighed and snuggled even closer to me. After that, we gradually drifted into a peaceful and fart-free sleep. Sally and I slept for a long time and then had a leisurely breakfast. We then met Mark at the North Seattle police station. Mark took us to an examination room where we could watch a video of the surgery. He said, "Once we knew which motel room Tom had booked, our technical team went there with a warrant. They got into the room a few hours before Tom arrived. This gave them enough time to install 3 different cameras and several microphones throughout the room. We took the regular receptionist to dinner and left one of ours undercover to manage the reception desk. As a result, we have an excellent video of the entire operation from 3 different angles in 4K resolution. Mark played a video showing Tom entering room 127. Tom arrived in the room around 6 and started setting up one of his cameras on a tripod. We think he wanted to record some more blackmail material against Sally. Mark sped up the playback, which showed Tom fussy around the room like a doped squirrel. Here we got our first major breakthrough. He slowed the playback down to half speed. The video here clearly shows Tom entering the passcode on his phone. This is a huge achievement, as we can now use that passcode to change the system passwords on all of his devices. This will prevent him or his accomplice from deleting evidence from those devices. This will also allow us to view all the media on his phone, iPad, and Mac. Did you find any blackmail videos of Sally? Yes, we found several videos of her and several files with other women. However, we suspect that he has many more files hidden elsewhere. Now that we monitor his devices, we can look through his password files, looking for accounts in cloud services on external servers. He may also have copies hidden in some physical location, but we did not find them in his home. Mark sped up the playback again until Sally walked into the room. The next 20 minutes showed Tom trying and failing to persuade Sally to take off her clothes. Sally treated him like a seasoned fisherman, forcing him to repeat threats about distributing the videos he filmed in Chicago. When Sally continued to be indecisive, he suggested she have a drink to relax. Sally took the glass and began to bring it to her lips. At the last moment, she wrinkled her nose, placed the glass on the bedside table away from Tom, and uttered the words that launched the operation. "This smells disgusting." At this moment, Tom tried to push Sally away and grab the glass back. Sally was great and refused to back down. Instead, she stabbed Tom. A second later, the police knocked down the door. The police pulled her away from Tom and quickly handcuffed the screaming Tom. Mark said, "We have received preliminary results of the cocktail Tom tried to give Sally. It was a nasty mixture of alcohol, several types of illegal substances. When we searched his things at the motel, we found the same illegal substances on him. This is a fresh attempt to drug you could have several years added to any sentence he receives." I raised my hand. "You mentioned videos of other women. Does that mean Sally isn't his first victim?" Mark nodded. "Yes, that's what we think. He was skilled enough in preparing videos with Sally that we suspect he's done this before, possibly with multiple women. We're still going through all of his computer devices for additional videos and photos. Based on information from our operation, we were able to obtain another search warrant for his home. We seized additional computer equipment there. The preliminary search on hard drives and flash drives continues. We haven't found much else yet. He may have files stored elsewhere. Location, but we haven't found anything yet. We're trying to make a list of all his email accounts, cloud services, Dropbox accounts, Google Drive, and OneDrive. We searched his office at the clinic. We are working with his wife to create a list of all the bank accounts and are checking to see if he has any safe deposit boxes associated with them." I rubbed my face. "So, what's next for Wilson?" "He will remain under guard in the hospital until he is discharged. His doctor expects him to remain in the hospital for another week. After that, he will be arraigned in court a week after his discharge. Bail will then be set. Once he pays it, he will be free pending trial." Sally said, "Wait, is he going to be released on bail?" "Yes, the Eighth Amendment prohibits the setting of excessive bail. Based on the current charges, his bail could be set at anywhere from $50,000 to several $100,000. If Wilson can come up with 10% of that amount, the bail agent will give him the rest." "Damn, I really hope you guys can find his archives before he pays bail. Otherwise, he'll have a chance to spread these videos of me." "We'll try, Sally." The next day, Sally called me from her clinic. Guess who was my patient at the appointment today? I took a guess and said the name of a random rock star. No, it was Nora Wilson, Tom's wife. Wow, what did she want? She said she was terribly ashamed of what Tom did to me. She is cooperating with the police and wants to do everything possible to put Tom in prison. Why does she support you and not her husband? She said Tom was beating her up. She finally had enough a few weeks ago and left him. She and her son are now living with her parents. Tom is an even bigger piece of crap than I thought. We didn't have much time to talk at the clinic, so I invited her to our house for pizza today at 6 p.m. She likes any pizza except olives and anchovies. I tried to get back to work, but it was difficult to concentrate. To distract myself, I took care of household chores. Soon I was up to my neck in tedious gardening work. After dragging a pile of leaves and grass clippings into our compost bin, I showered and ordered pizza. I answered the doorbell around 6 p.m. I saw two women, one of whom was holding a container of pizza. I paid for the food and turned to the other woman, who was slender, about Sally's height, and had short dark hair. "Hi, I'm John. Please come in." "I'm Nora. Thanks for having me." We set the table, and she accepted a glass of wine. We chatted on abstract topics while waiting for Sally. Sally came in 10 minutes later. "Sorry, I'm late. I had extra patients at my appointment." I poured Sally a glass of wine, and we continued our light conversation while devouring the pizza. Finally, we pushed the plates away, and Nora turned to Sally. "Thank you again for having me. This is very strange for me, but I needed to talk to you. Tom and I had our own problems, but I was devastated when the police told me about his arrest. I feel guilty for what happened to you." "Why do you feel guilty? Did you know what he was going to do to me?" No, we've had problems for a long time, but I didn't think he was capable of it. Sally asked, how long has this been going on? For at least the last 5 years, around the time I went back to work. Tom started criticizing everything I did or the way I looked. When Billy acted out at home or had problems with his studies, it was my fault. Tom got jealous if I talked to other parents at school events or to colleagues at work meetings. Our sex life had never been great, but in recent years it had become terrible. He began asking me to try strange things in bed, things that scared me and disgusted me. He never hit me, but the verbal and emotional abuse gradually escalated, especially after he was drinking. The last straw for me was an incident a few weeks ago when he ran out of beer and yelled at me in front of Billy for it, that I hadn't bought yet. When Billy started crying, Tom yelled at him to grow up and not be such a little coward. The next day, when he left for work, I packed my bags for Billy and me, and we moved in with mine, parents. This was about a week before his trip to Chicago. I feel like I may have pushed him over the edge, and he took it out on you. I'm so sorry. Nora started crying. Sally pulled up a chair and hugged Nora. Darling, you are not guilty of anything except for protecting yourself and your boy. Everything that Tom did is on his conscience, not yours. I don't blame you for anything. Nora sobbed for a while, then pulled herself together. Thank you for these words. The last few weeks have been hell for me. After we moved, I received a stream of abusive texts, emails, and voicemails from Tom. He said that I was a bad wife and a bad mother, and that he would get a divorce with me. He'll take Billy and leave me with nothing. He said he hid all our money and investments so that I would never find them. Sally said, "This is terrible. Have you consulted a lawyer?" Yes, but he's not too optimistic. A quick financial check reveals that Tom has already plundered most of our accounts and hidden the money somewhere. My lawyer has filed an application to block Tom from causing further damage. We can probably recover the assets that he hid, but it will take some time. Tom has always been the main breadwinner in our family. It will be difficult for Billy and me to survive on my salary alone. I asked, "Do you have any idea where he might hide it?" My lawyer said that it could be anywhere. It could be overseas accounts or some kind of Bitcoin account. They will be difficult to find and access. However, Tom is not very strong in computer matters, so I find it difficult to believe that he has. It's more likely that the money is hidden in some physical location that only Tom knows about. I nodded. Yes, in a big city like Seattle, it can be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Nora laughed. Speaking of hidden in a haystack, Tom can actually do that. His family left him a small plot of land south of town. His grandparents sold most of the land but left him about 10 acres. He leases it to a local farmer who grows hay on this property. If he hid something in the hay barn, I would never have found it. Sally said, "The town is full of banks and lots of safes." That's a good idea, I said. Keys to safes have a distinctive look. Are there any keys at his house that you don't recognize? Now that you mention it, he does have a set of keys in his desk at home. I never paid much attention to that before. I said, "Looks like we need to let Detective Mark Johnson know about these possibilities. With the key to the safe in hand, the police can get a warrant to open a certain safe." Sally said, "There are also plenty of storage facilities in the Seattle area where he could have hidden almost anything." I had an idea, but I didn't want to give Sally or Nora any false hope. I just said, "I'll call Mark and let him know what we're thinking." The next day, I met with Mark and told him about my conversation with Nora. In turn, he told me about the progress of the police investigation. We've looked into his computer equipment and online accounts. So far, we haven't found any online video storage or evidence of secret offshore bank accounts. I agree with Nora's impression that Tom is not a techie, so this is probably a dead end. What about that keychain Nora was talking about? Could that help narrow down the search to a specific bank? Mark spent a few minutes looking through the police log of the search of Tom's house. Okay, here it is. This set of keys was mentioned in the search inventory, and here's a photo of it. He studied the photo and said, "Yes, several of these keys do look like safe deposit keys. We'll do a survey of local banks and see what we can find." I nodded. So that still leaves us with a depressingly large number of other physical locations to search. Tom could be out on bail in 2 weeks and move things around. However, I have a few ideas that might help us with the search. When will you be able to interview Tom? The doctor said he will be well enough to have some preliminary conversations by tomorrow. However, he will have a lawyer present and may refuse to talk. When you're interviewing a suspect, is it acceptable for you to use nonverbal cues to help guide the questioning? Yes, we do that. Most of us develop some sort of sixth sense over time that tells us when a suspect is lying or telling the truth. We can't use that impression as evidence in court, but it helps guide the investigation. Okay, then what if your sixth sense got a little electronic help during an interrogation? Tell me more. What do you know about binary trees? Mark snorted. Nothing. How is this relevant? A binary tree is just technical jargon for the same search process that a child uses when playing an animal guessing game. By asking the right questions with yes or no answers, you can quickly narrow down the possibilities from all known animals to just a few. You can do the same with Wilson. Okay, I see. But what kind of electronic assistant is on your mind? My electronic nose can pick up several nonverbal parameters that can give you a rough yes-no answer without Wilson having to say a word. I told him more about the current prototype. Mark called me later that evening. Okay, I've arranged to meet Tom and his lawyer tomorrow in one of the hospital's conference rooms. You and I can meet a few hours before to set up your equipment. I made the final adjustments to the electronic nose prototype. My initial electronic nose sensor array was quite bulky and looked like a bunch of random kitchen utensils that had been in our damn drawer. I've spent the last week packing it into a much less noticeable case. I managed to fit all the important sensor elements into an old iPad case. By adding a small silent fan to the input port of the sensor, I was able to increase its sensitivity and make it slightly directional. I also installed an ER scanner in the same case. With the addition of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth modules, I could connect this now portable sensor array to my phone or laptop. The next day I met with Mark and handed him the latest prototype of the electronic nose. Keep this end of the sensor on your desk, pointed at Wilson. It will pick up his general body odor in real time while you interrogate him. It will primarily look for chemicals associated with the fight or flight response. It also has a built-in photoplethysmograph that will monitor his pulse, picking up tiny vibrations on the surface of his skin. If one of your questions concerns him, we should see an increase in the level and frequency of his pulse. In other words, it will give me the same information as a regular polygraph. Yes, it will give you his heart rate. You can watch his breathing for yourself. We won't have blood pressure or skin conductance data, but catecholamine levels should be a good proxy for those. When we got to the hospital, I connected my laptop to the sensor array and handed Mark the electronic nose. I also gave him an earpiece that we could use to communicate during the interview. One more thing, Mark. The electronic nose can take up to 15-20 seconds to get a good sample, so keep your pace of questions slow and steady. Give it enough time to digest each question. Got it. Okay, time to rock and roll. Mark set me up in a room next to the conference room. The headphones worked quite well and allowed me to transmit the results of the electronic nose in real time. As Wilson was wheeled into the conference room with his lawyer, I heard Mark introduce himself through the headphones. He told them the session would be recorded and then began his questions. He started with a few security questions, such as Tom's name, address, and employment history. Electronic nose data remained stable. As I suggested, Mark asked each question several times to give the electronic nose time to respond. I won't describe the entire interrogation, but here are a few key points. Q. Did you attend the internal medicine conference in Chicago on the dates listed? Oh, yes. Electronic nose, stable. Q. Did you have sex with Sally Anderson in her hotel room? Oh, yes. Electronic nose, stable. Q. Did you drug her and take advantage of Sally Anderson's helplessness in her hotel room? A. No. She came up to me and invited me to her room. Electronic nose, increased heart rate and a sharp jump in catecholamines. Q. Did you film sex with Sally Anderson? Oh, yes. Electronic nose, stable. Q. Did you threaten to distribute the video to her husband if she didn't agree to have sex with you again? A. No way. She loved it and wanted to do it again at home. Electronic nose, increased heart rate and catecholamine levels. Q. Have you done this with other women? Oh no. Electronic nose, large increase in heart rate and catecholamines. Q. Do you have video of these meetings? Oh no. Electronic nose, heart rate and catecholamine levels remain elevated. Q. Are these videos hidden in your house? Oh no. Electronic nose, pulse returned to normal. Catecholamine levels are again normal. Q. Are these videos hidden somewhere else? A. No, I don't have hidden videos. Electronic nose, large increase in heart rate and catecholamines, and so on. Mark and I met later that day and correlated the electronic nose readings with each question. Results. 1. Wilson probably subjected several other women to this. 2. Wilson had a secret stash of videos that were probably not stored in the cloud. 3. The videos were most likely stored on physical media. 4. He had something hidden elsewhere in Seattle, possibly in a storage area. 5. Wilson almost certainly hid assets from his wife. 6. Wilson probably has something hidden on his family farm. None of this would stand up as evidence in court, but it narrowed the endless haystack down to a much smaller number of haystacks. Mark asked, "Okay, we have dozens of storage facilities, each with hundreds of storage units." A check of his bank statements showed no costs for renting storage units, so he may have been paying in cash. How can we narrow down the search? Yes, I have an idea. While you were interrogating Wilson, I was able to get a fairly complete scent profile of him. It will take a little work, but we can use portable electronic nose modules to quickly scan each warehouse facility. As we walk around the facility, we will walk through public corridors and check each cell using an electronic nose. If Wilson touched the locks and latches of a certain cell, the electronic nose would pick up his scent. Mark said, "That's great. If we get a match, we can send in forensics to take fingerprints. If the cell has a keyed lock, we'll try all the matching keys on the Wilson keychain on the matching cells. We'll also look at any available CCTV footage from the site." We found 58 storage facilities in Seattle, with a total of approximately 5,000 storage units. I estimated that one of my electronic noses could scan at least 2 cells per minute. Without taking into account the time it takes to move between objects, it would take us 2,500 minutes to check everything, or about 42 hours. Mark and I took my 2 portable eNose modules and started at the storage facility closest to Wilson's house. If we didn't find a match there, we would continue to other objects in a spiral pattern starting from his house. We got lucky after 2 days. We checked the cells at the Stormore facility on 15th Ave W and got a small cell match. The forensics team took prints from the lock and door of the locker and found a match to Wilson's prints. We were delighted at this moment. Mark questioned the Stormore manager and learned that the locker rental was paid in cash. The lease listed the name Will Thomason with an address indicating a mailbox rental store in the Magnolia area. Stormore surveillance video showed a man in a hoodie using the locker, but his face was not visible. With fingerprints, Mark had no problem getting a warrant to open the box. Inside, police found a variety of illegal substances and a large collection of portable hard drives. Based on the seized materials, Mark hoped to charge Wilson with other crimes. We were thrilled to find Wilson's storage locker. We hope that the evidence found there will help keep him behind bars longer. Alas, the locker did not contain anything that would help solve Nora's financial problems. But we still had one obvious place to look. Mark's binary tree interrogation suggested that we might find something hidden on the family farm. Wilson's doctors planned to discharge him within a few days. Depending on his hearing date and bail amount, he could be out of jail in 7 days. We needed to continue our search at the farm. Sally and I hosted a search planning evening at our home. After we ate the food we ordered, Nora began, "I can't tell you how grateful I am for your help. You have my permission to search the farm, provided that I go with you tomorrow." Mark said, "Thank you, Nora. However, we have sufficient grounds to search the farm. I can easily get a search warrant." Mark received a digital farm map from the King County Recorder's office. I projected it and a comparable Google satellite map onto the HDTV screen in our living room. Mark said, "The 10 acres of land we will be searching is a square 660 feet on a side. That's a lot of land for the 4 of us. I would suggest focusing on the buildings and surrounding area. However, if Tom hid something underground away from buildings, we'll be out of luck. John, can you bring your electronic nose?" "Sure, I'll bring some. I have a few other ideas, but they may not work." We discussed logistics for a while and then went home and had a good night's sleep. The next morning, search warrant in hand, we went to the old Wilson farm and arrived there about 8 a.m. We were met by Fred Smith, who lived nearby and leased Wilson's land to grow hay. He gave us a quick tour of the farm. "I don't see Tom here often. Sometimes I notice his car at the house maybe once a month. He's not very talkative, he just waves his hand and goes about his business." Nora asked, "Do you know of any hiding places in buildings or fields?" "No. If he was hiding something, it had to be in the building. I've been growing hay in these fields for the last 15 years and have never seen any digging here." We spent several hours searching the barn. We raked the hay. They knocked on the walls, scanned the first floor and attic with an electronic nose. We processed the warehouses in the same way. Nothing. Crap. We took a short break outside when a white van pulled up in front of the barn. On its side was an abstract logo and the words "Green Site." The young man came out and introduced himself as Will Swanson. "I wasn't sure that I could come today, but we had a cancellation. What are we examining today?" The others looked at me with raised eyebrows. Will's company specializes in aerial photography of land and crops. I shook his hand and said, "Glad you could come, Will." I pulled out my iPad and showed him the air ticket. "We need to scan the entire 10 acres, but take a particularly close look at the buildings." Will pulled several cases out of the van and within 30 minutes had the drone ready to fly. He entered the longitude and latitude of the 4 corners of the farm into the control panel and launched the drone. He quickly rose to 100 feet and then began to fly back and forth, scanning large areas of the ground on each pass. About 30 minutes later, the drone returned and landed next to the van. Will inserted the drone's memory card into his laptop. Its software siloed all data into a set of highly detailed farm maps. He handed me digital copies of all the maps and said, "Here are the visible light, and UV scans of the entire site. That's all I could bring today. Our thermal and magnetic drones are all busy today. If you need them, I can bring them next week." We studied the maps on my laptop screen. We were initially disappointed as most of the farm looked unremarkable in the pictures. However, Will pointed out 2 features in the infrared image that I had not noticed: a small square area south of the cabin and a roughly rectangular area west of the cabin. I asked, "What is this?" Will said, "Looks like weak areas of plant stress. I would assume that someone has dug there in the past. Maybe a septic system. Crap." Literally, we thanked Will and he packed up his drone and left. Neither of us was thrilled about the idea of digging up the septic tank, so we took our tools and headed towards the lodge with the enthusiasm of people going to dig their own mass grave. However, before we got far, a green van pulled up to the barn with the words "ground sound" on the side. My friends looked at me again, puzzled. I raised my hands and said, "Sorry, I wasn't sure if he could come with such short notice." I turned to the van and shook the driver's hand. "Everyone, this is Bob Barnett, ground-penetrating radar technician top-notch." In response to Sally and Nora's "What the hell?" looks, I added, "GPR is used to detect underground utilities and other buried objects. Bob can save us some digging and tell us more about what's under those two areas by the cabin." Both women visibly perked up at the news. Bob opened the back of the van and rolled out a device the size of a small grocery cart on four fat 14-inch tires. He loaded the car and asked where we wanted to start. We led him to the areas of interest to us near the house. He started with several passes through the smaller area south of the cabin. After a few minutes, he said, "Quite small structures, almost certainly a septic line and tank." He outlined the outlines of both structures with small, bright orange flags that materialized from his cart. He then turned his attention to a large area to the west of the cabin. After a few more minutes, he announced that we were looking at a relatively large void in the soil. He marked the void with the same plastic flags. When he finished, we saw a rectangular outline about 8 feet wide and 20 feet long, extending from the house. From the echo patterns, he estimated that the void was about 10 feet underground. This was getting quite interesting. However, a ground search turned up no sign of entry. Nora came up with a great idea. Perhaps there is some way to gain access from inside the cabin. We sent Bob to search in and around the hay barn. We were particularly interested in finding voids under the barn floor that a drone would not be able to see. Meanwhile, we noticed a small one-story house. Nora was looking through the keys on Tom's ring and found the one that opened the front door. The front door led into a combined living room-kitchen area with a small closed storage area. Behind this room was a single bedroom with a small bathroom. An initial inspection showed no obvious connection between the interior of the house and the void to the west. I scanned the house with my electronic nose, trying to detect Tom's scent. I found traces of his scent in the bedroom and bathroom, as well as on the sofa in the living room. There was also a slight trace of odor in the kitchen, especially in the refrigerator. However, the strongest concentration of Tom's scent was in the locked closet, especially along the floor. Interesting. Bob found nothing in the barn and brought his car back to the cabin when he was done. We moved furniture around so it could scan all the floors in the bathroom, bedroom, living room, and kitchen. As far as Bob could tell, these areas were on a solid slab of concrete. The only one unscanned the area was a storage room. We removed tools, canned food, and other clutter from the pantry floor. Bob rolled the ground-penetrating radar there and immediately discovered a large void under the floor. Very interesting. We spent the next hour carefully searching every inch of the closet and its floor, but found nothing. We were already on the verge of using pry bars to remove the floor, and then Sally stumbled upon the answer. While moving tools from hanging hooks in the closet, she accidentally turned one of them 90 degrees. At that moment, she heard a click, and the edge of the floor of the closet near the door rose a few centimeters. She grabbed the exposed edge of the floor and lifted it, revealing steep steps leading down into a dark room. Holy crap! I went to her closet. "Well done, Sally. Looks like you found someone's hiding place." Mark said, "We just found the secret bunker of a man who is now in prison for several crimes. Wilson may have hidden evidence of some of his crimes there. We want this evidence to remain intact so it can be used in court. Therefore, I need to be the first to go down there. If I see something, we will immediately go out and call a forensic team to process the scene." I said, "Should we worry about traps?" Nora said, "Tom is not very knowledgeable about electrical or mechanical objects. If there is a trap, he didn't build it." This was a small consolation. Mark asked me, "Can your electronic nose quickly check for explosives?" "Certainly. Give me a list of exactly what substances you want to test, and I will upload the corresponding chemical data." Luckily, my phone got a decent 5G signal in the lodge. 15 minutes later, the electronic nose was restrained and ready to go. I handed the electronic nose to Mark, and he slowly walked down the steps. He found no explosives, but Tom's scent became stronger. Mark shouted, "Everything is clear." I followed him down and saw a thick metal blast-proof door. Mark turned the wheel on the door until the bolts securing it to the frame were fully retracted. We then both stood behind her as he gently pulled her towards him. Nothing happened. Mark carefully looked over the edge of the door and illuminated the inside with a flashlight. He muttered, "Clear by." He then leaned down and carefully examined the bottom of the door frame. No stretch marks. He then studied the floor inside for a few minutes. "I don't see any obvious pressure plates." Mark went inside, looked around, and illuminated the area with a flashlight. I followed him and saw a rectangular room with corrugated steel walls. It was about 8 feet high, 8 feet wide, and about 20 feet long. The air was musty and stagnant, with a slight smell of mold. Plastic boxes lined both walls from floor to ceiling. I saw a dusty bunk bed in the far corner of the room, next to a small table and a folding chair. A yellowed 1960 calendar hung above the table. I said, "It looks like someone turned the container into a nuclear war shelter. In the 60s, a lot of people built bunkers like this." Sally called down the stairs, "Are you okay up there? Can I go down?" Mark shouted back, "Yes, but don't touch anything." Sally walked down the steps. Nora joined us and said, "Wow, Tom brought me here several times after our wedding, but he never told me about this room." She looked around. "What's in these boxes?" Mark put on a pair of nitrile gloves and handed me another. We pulled the box out from under the table. Mark grunted with effort. "Wow, unexpectedly heavy." We unzipped the lid and saw only a pile of old newspapers. When we removed them, we found several small metal boxes. We opened the first one and found rolls of gold coins. The next one contained a small bag containing clear, shiny stones that looked like diamonds. Another box was filled with silver coins. Another contained bundles of $100 bills. Nora was shocked. "Where does all this come from? Who owns it? Tom never told me about this." Mark opened the lid of another plastic box. We saw that it was filled with transparent plastic bags. Mark picked up the first bag, which contained underwear and a piece of paper with a date and initials on it. He put the bag back in the drawer and said, "Damn, I could be wrong, but I think we found a trophy case from Wilson's victims. We'll have to treat this entire bunker like a crime scene. Everything is out." We climbed back out of the bunker, and Mark called his colleague from Sheriff Sky King County Department. The first few sheriff's deputies arrived within 20 minutes, and the entire forensics team was on scene within an hour. The forensics team was thorough. It took them until dark to completely photograph the bunker and take fingerprints. They only finished cataloging all the contents of the bunker at midnight. When we returned home from the farm, we were exhausted. We only had enough energy to take off our clothes and fall into bed. We fell asleep within minutes and slept until we had enough sleep. We both took the rest of the week off. We were doing household chores and waiting for news from Mark. 2 days later, he came to our house. We hugged and he went inside. "I want to tell you about the progress of our investigation. The storage locker we found in Seattle appears to be Tom's main base of operations. He kept the main stock of illegal substances there for his crimes. He also kept additional video equipment there, including a laptop and a large collection of videotapes." He looked at Sally. "We found some video footage of Tom attacking you in Chicago. It was very difficult to watch them, but they confirm everything you told me and John. You were under the influence of illegal substances. Nothing happened voluntarily, and you have nothing to feel guilty about." I exhaled and felt great relief. I hugged Sally and said, "I'm sorry, honey. I should have known better. Cheating is not at all in your nature. You have the best moral compass of anyone I know. Damn, you have a moral navigator. Please forgive me for ever doubting you." She hugged me back and said, It's okay, honey. I've been doubting myself the past few weeks. I still don't remember that night in Chicago and was so scared that she somehow hit on the bastard. With a twinkle in his eye, Mark said, "We found another video of you. I guess you'd call it the Great Ball of Fire episode. By the end of that video, our entire team was on their feet applauding you. I think it would be good for you and John to watch it together." I hugged her tighter and said, "You are a true Amazon." Mark said, "As well as the video of you, we have footage of Tom with 6 other women. We have identified 2 of them and are working on 4 others. It appears that several women succumbed to his blackmail threats and slept with him again. If any of them are willing to testify, we'll probably add a few charges to Tom's." Sally seemed gloomily pleased. "Good news, Mark. Thank you. But what did you find in the bunker?" "Ah, the bunker. This appears to be his main storage location. We found copies of all the videos there. Tom seemed to collect trophies. We found several bags of women's panties neatly marked with dates and initials. Ultraviolet light testing showed traces of secretions, and we are testing them all for DNA." I asked, "What about coins, jewelry, and cash?" "Based on current gold and silver prices, cash and coins are worth between $300,000 and $400,000. We haven't graded the diamonds yet." I whistled. "Wow, nice nest egg. What do you think it was for?" Mark said, "It could have been part of an escape kit. There are places in the world where he could live on this money for many years. It's also possible that he did this simply to hide assets from Nora during the divorce." Now I have some bad news. Tom was arrested and bail was set at $300,000. He only needs to put up 10% of that through a surety, so he'll probably be out on bail by the end of the day. Sally said, "Damn, I was hoping that rotten bastard would stay in prison much longer." She looked thoughtful. "Are you guys going to keep an eye on him when he comes out? Are we in danger?" "Theoretically, we could follow him for up to a year without having to get a warrant. However, in practice, we simply do not have sufficient resources for continuous monitoring. Our best chance is to convince the prosecutor to quickly file additional charges and perhaps raise bail to an amount he cannot afford. I advise you to stay in the shadows as much as possible. Limit your time spent in public. If you are not at work, stay home. If Wilson comes to your house, call us immediately and don't let him inside." We followed Mark's advice for the next 2 weeks. We cooked all our meals at home, and the only shows we watched were those streaming online. We considered hiring a bodyguard, but decided against the idea due to the cost. A guard dog didn't seem practical to us either. Neither Sally nor I are ninjas or former Navy SEALs. We are not martial artists and do not have weapons. However, we had our own modest superpowers. Sally's 2 previous encounters with Wilson revealed her frightening talent for transforming into the Hulk and becoming she not to be joked with. I was an alpha geek with free time and a healthy bank account. Plans were made and things were purchased. UPS boxes arrived daily to reinforce our lock. If our fortress is stormed, we will repel the attack. There will be heads on pikes. I installed CCTV in and around our home with visible light and infrared cameras. I have installed several electronic nose systems at all entrances to our property. If they smell Wilson, they'll sound an alarm. A few nights later, the electronic nose and ear system alarms went off around 11 p.m. As we looked at the security monitors, 2 figures emerged from the darkness. Approaching our front door, the front ear camera clearly showed Tom Wilson with one arm around his wife's neck and a gun in the other hand. Sally shouted, "Plan A." We dialed 911, double-checked the locks on the doors, and lay low, waiting for the police to arrive. Wilson banged on our door with a pistol and shouted, "Open up, Anderson." When we didn't answer, he shouted again, "Let me go, or I'll shoot Nora." Crap. We didn't take into account the possibility of a hostage situation. I whispered to Sally, Plan B, which meant she should leave me here, get out the back door, run as far as possible, and wait for the police to arrive. She shook her head and whispered back, "No way, Plan C. Crap. Wilson hit the door again and shouted, "I'll shoot Nora in the leg on the count of 10. 1, 2, 3. Damn it. I waved for Sally to move away and whispered, "Okay, Plan C." She slid into the dark living room to my right. I shouted through the door, I'm coming, just a minute." Wilson continued to count. 6, 7, 8. I unlocked the door, opened it, and stepped back. Wilson burst in, still holding Nora and pointing the gun at me. "You bastards ruined my life. I'll kill her, and then I'll shoot you and your bitch wife." He looked around wildly. "Where the hell is she?" "Sally is not here. She went to her sister in Far Lap." Piyush Lap was the code word we chose for Plan C. I had about 3 seconds. 1001, 2002, 3000, and... Sally and I managed to save Nora and disarm Tom. The forensics team arrived and photographs were taken. Wilson's gun was packed in a bag. The doctors examined Nora, and she told us her version of events. I stupidly went home to get some more clothes. This was a bad decision because Tom was hiding there and set up an ambush. He shouted at me and hit me several times. I've never seen him so excited. He forced me to come here at gunpoint. A powerful wave of emotion flashed across her face. After a moment, she took a deep breath and continued, "Thank you so much for stopping him. I thought we were all going to die." By the time the police left, Sally, Nora, and I were still very excited. We went to a 24-hour cafe, drank coffee, and tried to eat some pie. Mark joined us an hour later and gave a quick update. He arrested Wilson for kidnapping and attempted murder. "Given his previous charges and what he tried to do to you tonight, there is no likelihood that the judge will grant him bail again." We finally calmed down, but didn't want to go home to the scene of the crime. Sally booked 2 adjoining hotel rooms. Sally watched Nora in one room while I slept in the other. Using images from Wilson's video archive and DNA from his trophies, all 6 women were eventually identified. 3 of them were ready to testify against him. He was ultimately found guilty of multiple counts. He was sentenced to life in prison and had his medical license revoked. Nora divorced him and received full custody of their son. She was awarded the house and 80% of their financial assets. The King County Sheriff's Department was unable to link the gold, silver, and diamonds from Tom's vault to any crime and ultimately turned them over to Nora. Wilson's lawyer tried to argue that the treasures were acquired before the marriage. Nora's lawyer refuted this, pointing out that the minting dates of most of the coins were after their wedding. Wilson and his lawyer were also unaware that most of the diamonds in his vault were GIA certified and therefore had engraved serial numbers. It was quite easy for Sally's lawyer to match these serial numbers with the purchase dates, which were all after the wedding. The family court judge was outraged by this low-key attempt to hide marital assets and awarded 90% of the vault to Nora and her son. Speaking of Nora, she and Mark have been dating for about 6 months. At first, Sally and I were surprised by this. We thought Mark was a perpetual bachelor, dating lots of women but never settling down. However, he always had a type, pretty female string players. I think he was doomed as soon as he heard Nora play the mandolin. He has since taught her son to play the double bass, and they get along great. I sometimes join them with my violin, and we play square dances and counter dances together. Sally and I continue to see our therapists, and our PTSD has gradually improved. We were able to gradually desensitize ourselves to Tom Wilson's concept. I think we handled it pretty well. We still sometimes trigger thoughts about him, but now it's more annoying than causing problems. Now, when she thinks of him, it is not as a powerful figure who humiliated and traumatized her, but as a pathetic figure to be ridiculed, an insignificant nonentity, a despicable bastard, a vision of contempt. I founded a startup based on my electronic nose and licensed the technology to several industries such as animal agriculture, medical diagnostics, and law enforcement. Royalty has already paid off our mortgage and all of Sally's medical school debts. Next on the list for us is a few exotic trips and then maybe starting a family. Are we still using an electronic nose at home? Yes, but only for fun. This entire experience has increased our appreciation of spousal trust and transparency. If I want to have sex, I just ask Sally. If she has a problem at work, she tells me. We will no longer use the electronic nose for this. The puns and wordplay that form the basis of our relationship are back in action. And yes, we started having sex again. It was a slow start, but it was great. One memorable example was after dinner at one of our favorite Mexican restaurants. Sally ate her favorite food combination, along with several scoops of El Muerto hot sauce. Sally says there is no definitive medical evidence that capsaicin is an aphrodisiac. AI wasn't interfering in our sex lives anymore, but the was definitely there. We cuddled in bed afterwards and went back into another round of puns and verbal sparring about Thomas Wilson. Mexican food is the gift that keeps on giving. As we lay there in post-coital, post-pun bliss, Sally let out a powerful Richter 6.0 techno-colored fart. The electronic nose next to the bed went wild for a moment, recorded a new record, and then calmed down. I raised my eyebrows at her. Wow, that was a good one. A little more love for Thomas. In her best Monty Python French accent, she bit her lip and said, "I'm farting in his general direction." Romantic, isn't it? Well, all I know is that my sweet canary is back and singing in the mines again. For you, it might be just a fart, but to me, it's hallelujah. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.